Hi, I'm Rebekah Lester, and I'm an attorney with Triangle Smart Divorce.
And I'm Lauren O'Malley, and I'm also an attorney at Triangle Smart Divorce. And today we're going to be talking about collectibles and equitable distribution. So, Rebekah, what types of things are collectibles when we're talking about assets?
So, a collectible I like to think of as anything that you might keep in your house or in a storage locker that might have value that isn't a traditional asset like a car or a bank account or like your kitchenware.
So, would this be something like a watch collection or something that someone collects that you may not think has value but actually does?
Absolutely. So sometimes, and I'm sure you've seen it in your cases too, we have clients where either them or their significant other has a collection of art, jewelry, purses, fashion, but sometimes even things like baseball cards, trading cards like Pokemon or Magic the Gathering, or other things that can have very real monetary value without being an obvious item on an equitable distribution affidavit.
So, if someone does have a collection of, say, watches or even cards, what would we do? Would we value them? How would we value them?
I think for valuing them, the first thing we'd have to decide is, are they marital property? So were they acquired before you got married and their only value is because the market has changed? Or are they something that has been purchased or added to or contributed to from the day that you got married until the date of separation? Once we know if an asset is marital, we may want to decide first what we think the value might be, because that could tell us right off the bat if it's worth kind of going to the next step. If we're talking about a collection that might only be worth a few $100s to maybe even a few $1,000s, it might not be worth the price of authenticating and appraising those assets.
And appraisals can be really expensive. So we really do need to consider, is it something that could have significant value or not? And I know in one of my cases, one person had the whole collection. So knowing that if we ask to get it appraised or valued, they may not give us everything in that collection, including the most valuable items. And if your client doesn't know, if they're, say, trading cards, and your client doesn't know the extent of the collection and know what cards are in there, that other person can easily hold cards back. They know what's valuable, hold these valuable cards back or valuable items back, and then they're not included in the appraisal, and you just lose out on it.
So that is a really good point. So when you're thinking about what is in the collection, if you're not yet separated, but you're thinking that this may go towards separation, a good idea might be to take some kind of an informal inventory of what those items are so that you know, has everything been turned over? Because unlike, say, a bank account where there's going to be a very obvious record that money was transferred from point A to point B, it's a little more difficult to figure out where a card went or something small that might be easy to hide or move or give to a friend.
That's a really good point, because tracing could be nearly impossible if you don't know, you don't have these records of these items. And you may be able to talk about this, like the Pokemon cards, Magic the Gathering cards. I mean, sometimes the value can change just based on different scenarios.
The current market for certain kinds of collectibles goes up and down pretty regularly, and it's something that only people who are in those spaces really closely track. So you could have for example, Pokemon or Magic the Gathering card that is worth $5,000 at the beginning of the month, and at the end of the month it might be worth $100 or less. And that can be because of things that are niche to that specific hobby or collection, about what is the value, what is the use, what is the supply and demand. If there's a massive reprint of a card, is it still as valuable? If there's a change in the rules for the game, is it still as valuable? If the dynamic for people who are collectors has shifted from one path to another and they're now more interested in a separate product, is it still as valuable?
Well, that's a really good point because, what you may think is valuable at the beginning of your case could be worth nothing. So it may not be worth it to trade to say, I want to keep this. I have this card. Let me give you, it's worth $5,000, say. So let me give you $5,000 or $2,500 in cash to make up for it. I mean, it may not be worth trading real money or assets for these types of, say, cards.
Absolutely. And that's a bigger part of the equitable distribution question in general when we're deciding how do we divide every asset, not just collectibles, is what is the long-term stability of that asset and what is your use and access to that asset? Because if we're talking about perhaps like a single parent who might need cash on hand or the ability to put a down payment on a new house, then having cash equity or an account that's more easily liquidated might be potentially more valuable than a box of trading cards.
Right, that you may not even be able to sell once you get them because they may be worth nothing and you thought they were very valuable. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And even if they are still worth something, the act of taking that collectible and turning it into liquid cash or something that is more easily used to fund your lifestyle could take time, and time is not often something that people in those situations are willing to sacrifice.
Now, I mean, if you have a collection of, your wife has a collection of really expensive purses, Louis Vuitton purses, that might be a little bit different because those are easier to value, and we're not in a game where things are shifting that quickly, so it may be worth it in those types of scenarios. Rolex watches, to say let's get these valued and appraised, and let's really consider that in the overall distribution. I think the cards are where it's more of a huge gamble,
and it can be a gamble, but it can also be worth it. I did have a case where one of the spouses had a trading card collection that we believed was roughly worth $100,000. So there are times when it is worth it to consider. So when we are talking about, hey, we think we've identified the asset, we know what's in it, we know it's in the collection, we know that it's marital, we're willing to kind of accept the risk that it might not stay consistent throughout the course of time and that it might not be super easily acceptable cash. We still want to put a number on it and add it to the spreadsheet. What would we do?
I mean, I think that, we can go eBay, looking and seeing what eBay people are selling for is not always the best. But I think if you're negotiating, you can kind of estimate what you think it's worth. And if the other person holds the asset, you're going to go a little bit higher, knowing that you're going to come off of that in negotiations. But if you have to go to court, that's a whole different ballgame, and you're going to have to actually have paperwork, appraisals to back it up. But in negotiations, you can negotiate anything. You can stick a number on that stuff and, see if it flies in negotiations. But most likely, you're going to come off of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Quite a bit. But I also want to talk about if you do have a collection and you're getting married, I would recommend taking pictures on the date of marriage or close to the date of marriage of what you had before. And then that way we can see, okay, well, some of this is premarital. I owned these before marriage. These I've gotten after marriage. So those are marital. Those are up for discussion. But you want to make sure you're easily able to separate the marital and separate if you did have a collection prior to marriage.
Correct. And that can also get somewhat complicated, particularly in collection space if somebody is exchanging one part of a collection for another. So knowing what existed on the date of marriage, if you are in the process of considering getting married, it can be very, very helpful in the event that you did have to get a divorce.
And if you do an exchange, keeping track of what you are exchanging for. So if you're exchanging separate cards or separate property for a new one, then keep track of that because it could still be separate depending on values and stuff.
So if we did have to go to court over a collection, what kinds of experts would we look for?
I mean, we would definitely have to get some type of appraisal done, and this appraisal is going to have to be, appraiser is going to have to be able to come into court. I mean, I know I talked to somebody before, about getting cards valued, and I was told the person was in Virginia. So it can get very expensive because that person's going to have to travel here. You're going to have to pay for them to come to court, and pay for them to testify and to potentially stay here if you're going to have to bring somebody into the state or out of the local area. But you're definitely going to have somebody who is well versed in the type of collectible that you have, that has significant background in it and appraising it, and can come and competently testify about it.
Absolutely. You can't just use anyone who does appraisals on other assets. You really need to find somebody who is familiar with and competent in that specific niche. And depending on what kind of collectible we're talking about, that niche could be massive, or it could be so small that you are having to pull in people from out of state or across the country.
And I think then you really think about, is this worth it? The cost that's going to be involved in that, and is it worth even doing that? So it doesn't hurt to get something appraised if you know what's there and you just want an idea, depending on the cost. I mean, the cost, you may not even want that. But if you're really going to go to court over it, you really need to consider whether that's worth it.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that you should be having ongoing discussions with your legal team when you're doing property discussions as a whole, is what things are worth settling and what things are worth agreeing to, and what things are really worth getting those expert opinions, doing a full valuation, and really knowing to the penny what something is worth.
Well, and going to that is that you do have to tell your legal team if these collectibles exist, and you need to do it early on, because if we do have to pull somebody in who's not local, or if it's a very, specific thing that we have to find somebody to even value it, I mean, that can take a lot of time. So if you just tell us right before a mediation, or even worse, before court, we're not going to be able to even do much with it. So it's very important early on, if somebody has a collection that you think might be worth a lot of money, that you let us know.
And I do always try to ask my clients in that initial consultation whether they believe that there is anything outside of the ordinary, like a collectible, and I do give them some examples of what that might be. But even so, sometimes clients will come back later and will tell me something that either they hadn't remembered existed, or they didn't know existed, or they didn't think was important enough to mention, that has later been an asset on those ED spreadsheets when we're dividing property.
Right.